There is a peculiar fear in silence. It unnerves us as if we are left alone in a vast emptiness. But what if I told you that silence is not an absence, but a presence? A presence more real, more powerful, and more life-changing than the ceaseless clamor of this world. We live in an age where the voice of the world is never still. We are bombarded with noise voices on screens, the hum of busyness, the relentless demands of life. And yet, the most profound revelations come not in the noise, but in the hush that follows it. God is not absent in silence. Rather, silence is often the only language through which he speaks. In those sacred moments, he does not merely inform, he transforms. But why does he so often choose silence? Because true listening requires quiet. The most profound wisdom cannot be shouted, it must be discerned. The soul, like a deep well, must be still if it is to reflect the sky. We see this pattern throughout history. The greatest figures of faith were led into silence before they were entrusted with their divine mission. Moses tended sheep in the wilderness before standing before Pharaoh. Elijah heard God not in the wind or fire, but in a still, small voice. Even Christ himself withdrew into the desert before he began his work. Silence is not the end of action, it is the preparation for it. But silence is not always comforting. Sometimes God's silence feels like abandonment. We cry out and hear nothing in return. Yet this, too, is a test of faith. It is in these moments that we must trust him most. Silence does not mean he is far. It means he is working in ways beyond our understanding. And so, dear friends, I urge you, embrace the silence. Do not flee from it, but seek it out. Set aside moments each day to withdraw from the noise. Let your heart be still. Let your mind be quiet. For in that silence, you may find what you have been longing for, an encounter with the one who has been speaking all along. It is in silence that God unlocks the greatest blessings. Will you listen? The power of stillness. Silence is often misunderstood. Many perceive it as a void, an absence of sound, or a passive state of doing nothing. Yet silence is, in truth, a presence, an active and profound force that allows the human soul to listen, reflect, and receive divine wisdom. In a world that values constant motion and endless communication, stillness seems like an interruption rather than an invitation. However, the deepest revelations and the most life-changing transformations often occur in the moments when we allow silence to take its rightful place. Stillness is not simply about refraining from speaking or avoiding external noise. It is an inner discipline, a conscious choice to quiet the restless mind and open the heart to something greater than itself. The spiritual life has always been deeply intertwined with stillness, for it is in the absence of noise that the voice of God is most clearly heard. Throughout history, those who have sought wisdom and divine direction have first learned the practice of silence. It is not an escape from reality, but a way of entering into it more fully, with clarity and purpose. The world, however, resists silence. Modern life is structured around activity, productivity, and constant stimulation. Rarely are we encouraged to stop, to be still, or to sit quietly with our thoughts. Instead, we are conditioned to fill every gap with sound, whether through conversations, entertainment, or distractions. This incessant noise does not merely surround us, it begins to shape us, making it difficult to distinguish between what is urgent and what is truly important. The mind, accustomed to the clamor, struggles to find rest, and the soul, longing for connection with its creator, is left unheard in the chaos. But silence is not passive. It is an active force that reshapes us. In stillness, the heart is softened, the mind is sharpened, and the spirit is attuned to the unseen. When we step away from the noise of the world, we allow ourselves to be recalibrated to the rhythms of eternity. The power of silence lies in its ability to prepare the soul for divine encounters. It is in the quiet moments that faith is deepened, character is refined, and understanding is expanded. There is a reason why those who seek wisdom retreat to silence before making great decisions. Leaders, prophets, and saints throughout the ages have embraced solitude before stepping into their purpose. Moses, before leading his people, spent years in the wilderness, tending sheep in quiet obscurity. Elijah, in his moment of despair, did not hear God in the wind, the earthquake, or the fire, but in a still, small voice. Christ himself often withdrew to lonely places to pray, demonstrating that stillness is not the opposite of action, but rather its foundation. Stillness does not mean inactivity. It is a discipline that allows space for reflection and transformation. In silence, fears that once seemed overwhelming are put into perspective. Worries lose their grip, and distractions lose their appeal. The inner clamor of doubt, anxiety, and restlessness is gradually replaced by a sense of assurance, for it is in quietness that one realizes the presence of something far greater than oneself. The power of stillness is also seen in its ability to sharpen perception. When one is constantly surrounded by noise, true listening becomes impossible. Words lose their weight, thoughts become scattered, and attention is easily diverted. But when the noise is stripped away, when distractions are silenced, one begins to hear not just with the ears but with the soul. The subtle movements of the heart, the gentle whispers of conscience, and the quiet promptings of divine guidance become unmistakably clear. Yet embracing stillness is not easy. The moment external noise is removed, an internal noise often takes its place. The mind, conditioned by years of distraction, resists quietness. Thoughts race, memories surface, and anxieties demand attention. This is why silence must be practiced with patience. It is not a one-time event, but a lifelong discipline that requires intention and persistence. Over time, the restless mind learns to settle, and the soul begins to dwell in a peace that surpasses understanding. Stillness is not something to be feared, but something to be cultivated. It is the soil in which faith grows, the space where truth is revealed, and the place where divine wisdom is imparted. When one embraces silence, one steps into a reality that is deeper and richer than the world of noise ever could be. It is here that one discovers the voice of God, not in the thunderous clamor of the world, but in the quiet depths of the heart. The world is never silent. It speaks constantly, pressing itself upon our minds through conversations, media, responsibilities, and distractions. It calls for attention with urgency, demanding that we engage, react, and respond. This noise is not just external. It infiltrates the soul, shaping thoughts, emotions, and even beliefs. The more one listens to the world's endless chatter, the more difficult it becomes to hear anything else. God, in contrast, often speaks in whispers. His voice is not one that competes with the noise of the world, but waits behind it, calling the listener to step away from distraction and into stillness. Unlike the voices that flood daily life, voices that demand, persuade, or entertain, God's voice does not force itself upon anyone. It must be sought, listened to, and received with a willing heart. His words are never hurried, never shallow, never manipulative. They carry truth, peace, and clarity, but only for those who choose to listen. The challenge of distinguishing between the voice of God and the noise of the world has existed throughout history. The human heart is constantly being pulled in different directions, torn between the immediate and the eternal, between what is loudest and what is truest. In the biblical narrative, Israel repeatedly struggled with this very issue. When surrounded by the voices of surrounding nations, foreign gods, and their own desires, they often failed to hear the divine guidance that had been given to them. Instead of listening to the one who led them, they followed the voice that was most familiar, the voice that aligned with their fears or their ambitions. Modern life amplifies this struggle. Never before has so much information been available at every moment. The mind is rarely given the chance to rest, to process, or to reflect. Social media, news outlets, entertainment, and responsibilities all create a constant state of engagement. Each notification, each headline, each conversation adds to the growing noise that fills the heart and mind. As a result, silence becomes uncomfortable, even foreign. Many avoid it altogether, preferring the distraction of endless input rather than the stillness required for true listening. The problem is not that all worldly noise is inherently evil. Some of it is necessary work, relationships, responsibilities, and even recreation all have their place. The danger lies in allowing these voices to become so dominant that they drown out the most important one. God does not speak in the same way the world does. His guidance does not come through flashing lights or urgent demands, but through quiet conviction and deep-seated wisdom. His words do not appeal to the emotions in the way the world's messages do. Instead, they speak to the soul, calling it back to truth. Elijah's encounter with God in the wilderness illustrates this reality. After fleeing to Mount Horeb in fear and exhaustion, Elijah experienced a series of powerful events, a great wind, an earthquake, and a fire. But God was not in any of these. Instead, he was in the still small voice that followed. This moment serves as a lesson for all who seek divine direction. The most dramatic and attention-grabbing experiences are not necessarily where God is found. He does not need to overwhelm in order to be heard. Instead, he speaks in the quiet moments, waiting for the heart to be still enough to receive him. Recognizing God's voice requires intentionality. Just as one must tune an instrument to the correct frequency in order to play harmonious music, so must the soul be tuned to hear God's words. This process involves withdrawing from distractions, creating space for silence, and training the mind to filter through the countless voices that vie for attention. The world will always speak loudly, but God's voice, though soft, is far more powerful for those who learn to listen. There is a stark contrast between the effects of worldly noise and the voice of God. The noise of the world often leads to restlessness, anxiety, and confusion. It fills the mind with worries about the future, comparisons to others, and endless cycles of dissatisfaction. It encourages hurried decisions, shallow distractions, and an insatiable craving for more. The voice of God, however, brings peace. It does not lead to frantic striving, but to trust. It does not feed insecurity, but offers assurance. It does not push toward meaningless pursuits, but calls toward purpose. Learning to hear God's voice is not a one-time event, but a lifelong discipline. It requires not only moments of silence, but a heart that is continually open to receiving His guidance. This means choosing day after day to step away from the noise even when it feels unnatural. It means resisting the urge to fill every spare moment with entertainment, news, or productivity, and instead embracing the stillness that allows true wisdom to be heard. The world will never stop speaking. Its voices will always be present, offering opinions, distractions, and pressures, but the choice remains with the listener. Will the soul be filled with noise, or will it make room for the voice of God? The answer to that question determines the direction of one's life, not just in fleeting moments, but for eternity. Faith is easy when answers come swiftly, when prayers are met with immediate responses, and when divine direction is clear. But what happens when silence stretches endlessly, when God seems distant, and when the heavens feel closed? This is the true test of faith, not when God speaks, but when he is silent. Silence forces the soul to wrestle with doubt, to confront its own frailty, and to determine whether belief is based on feelings or on trust in the unseen. Throughout history, those who walked closest with God experienced long seasons of divine silence. Abraham, called to be the father of many nations, waited decades before the promise of a son was fulfilled. Joseph, given dreams of greatness, spent years in slavery and imprisonment before he saw even a glimpse of their realization. Job, stripped of everything, sat in the ashes with no explanation from God. Christ himself, in the agony of the cross, cried out, my God, why have you forsaken me?" Silence is not a sign of abandonment, but a crucible in which faith is refined. When God seems silent, the human heart is quick to assume he is absent. Yet silence is often the space where the deepest work is done. A seed buried beneath the soil does not immediately show signs of growth, but beneath the surface, roots are forming, strengthening, preparing for what is to come. So it is with faith. When God withholds immediate answers, he is not ignoring his children. He is strengthening them, deepening their trust, and preparing them for something greater than they can yet perceive. The waiting that comes with silence is uncomfortable. The mind craves certainty, and the heart longs for reassurance. In these moments, doubt whispers that God has forgotten, that he does not care, or that faith itself is futile. But the test of faith is not in receiving answers, it is in continuing to trust even when answers do not come. True belief is not measured by how one responds to miracles, but by how one endures when miracles seem absent. Silence exposes the motives of the heart. If faith is only held because of immediate blessings, then it is not faith, but transaction. A faith that endures silence is a faith that loves God for who he is, not merely for what he gives. This is why silence is a refining fire. It burns away false expectations, shallow beliefs, and selfish desires, leaving behind a purer, stronger trust. The struggle in divine silence is not new. The Psalms are filled with cries of desperation. How long, O Lord? Will you forget me forever? Yet these same Psalms, though beginning in anguish, often end in trust. Silence does not mean God is absent, but that he is teaching something that cannot be learned in any other way. The greatest lessons in faith are not taught in moments of clarity, but in the uncertainty that forces dependence. Silence also reveals where one's faith truly rests. If trust is dependent on constant reassurances, then faith is in the reassurance itself rather than in God. The strongest faith is one that continues even when emotions waver, when circumstances seem bleak, and when God does not speak as expected. Silence is not God's rejection, but his invitation to deeper reliance. There is a tendency to mistake silence for inactivity. If God is not speaking, the assumption is that he is not working. Yet Scripture shows that God's greatest works often unfold in the unseen. When Israel was enslaved in Egypt for 400 years, God seemed silent, yet he was orchestrating their deliverance. When Christ lay in the tomb, the world believed all hope was lost. Yet in the silence of that moment, the greatest victory in history was being prepared. Just because God is silent does not mean he is still. Silence is also a call to persistence. The easy path is to give up, to assume that because God has not spoken, he never will. But faith presses on, believing that even in the quiet, he remains faithful. It is in these moments that perseverance is forged, endurance is built, and the soul learns what it means to walk by faith, not by sight. Many desire the faith of Abraham, the wisdom of Joseph, or the strength of Job, but few are willing to endure the silence that shaped them. God's greatest servants were not made in moments of ease, but in seasons of waiting, uncertainty, and stillness. The silence they endured was not a sign of God's absence, but of his deeper work within them. Silence is a test, but it is also a gift. It strips away illusions of control, dismantles self-sufficiency, and leaves only the raw, unshaken foundation of trust in God alone. It teaches the soul that even when God does not answer in the expected way, he remains present. Faith that survives silence is faith that is unbreakable. Growth is often mistaken for activity. In a world that values movement, production, and measurable progress, stillness appears unproductive, even wasteful. Yet the deepest transformations take place not in the noise of action, but in the quiet of reflection. Silence is the soil in which the soul grows, the space where character is shaped, and the place where one truly comes to understand the voice of God. Transformation is rarely immediate. Just as a seed remains hidden beneath the earth before breaking through the surface, the greatest spiritual growth often happens in moments of stillness before it becomes visible. In silence, the soul wrestles with truth, confronts its weaknesses, and discovers the depths of faith. The external world may see no change, but within, something profound is taking root. Silence is uncomfortable because it forces confrontation with the self. In the noise of life, distractions serve as an escape from deeper reflection. Work, entertainment, and conversation keep the mind occupied, preventing it from facing the fears, doubts, and unresolved questions buried beneath the surface. But when silence removes these distractions, the heart is left exposed. It is here, in this raw state, that true transformation begins. The process of inner change is not always gentle. Silence reveals what noise conceals. The insecurities masked by busyness, the wounds hidden beneath distractions, and the fears drowned out by constant input rise to the surface. This is why many avoid stillness, fearing what they might discover. But just as a wound must be exposed before it can heal, so must the soul be stripped of its illusions before it can be renewed. Great spiritual figures throughout history have embraced silence, not as an escape from life, but as preparation for it. Moses, before leading a nation, spent years in solitude tending sheep. Paul, after his conversion, withdrew into the wilderness before beginning his ministry. Even Christ himself retreated to lonely places to pray before performing miracles and teaching crowds. Silence was not their retreat, it was their transformation. True wisdom is not found in constant talking, but in deep listening. Silence teaches the art of listening not just to words, but to the movements of the heart, the stirrings of the spirit, and the quiet promptings of God. When the world's noise is stripped away, the voice of God becomes clearer. He does not shout over the distractions of life. He waits for those who are willing to be still enough to hear him. Silence is also the place where identity is formed. The world defines people by their achievements, possessions, and external status, but in stillness, these things fade away. What remains is the true self, the one that exists apart from titles, accomplishments, and opinions. It is here that God speaks, not to what a person does, but to who they are. He calls them by name, not by their success or failure, but by their place as his child. The discipline of silence also cultivates patience. Transformation is slow, and silence teaches the soul to wait. In an age of instant gratification, this waiting feels unnatural, even frustrating. But just as a tree does not rush its growth, neither does the soul mature overnight. Silence trains the heart in endurance, shaping it to trust in God's timing rather than its own. Resistance to silence is natural. The mind, accustomed to noise, rebels against stillness. Thoughts race, anxieties demand attention, and the temptation to return to distraction is strong. But perseverance in silence brings reward. Over time, the restless mind settles, and a deeper peace takes its place. What once seemed unbearable becomes a place of refuge, a sacred space where the soul meets with God. Silence transforms perspective. When the mind is constantly filled with external voices, it struggles to see clearly. Problems seem larger than they are, priorities become distorted, and temporary concerns take precedence over eternal truth. But in silence, clarity emerges. The soul sees from a higher vantage point, recognizing what truly matters and releasing what does not. There is strength in silence. The greatest battles are not fought in public, but in the quiet places of the heart. It is in silence that temptations are overcome, wounds are healed, and faith is strengthened. The soul that learns to stand firm in stillness will not be shaken by the noise of the world. Silence is not passive. It is a force that works beneath the surface, shaping, refining, and preparing the soul for what lies ahead. It is the unseen work that produces visible change, the quiet discipline that leads to unshakable faith. The transformation it brings is not immediate, but it is lasting. It is in silence that the greatest growth occurs, not in the rush of activity, but in the stillness where God is at work.